My name is Mark. I'm 32 years old, married to a wonderful woman named Sarah. We've been married for 5 years now. Sarah is beautiful, smart, and kind-hearted. We live in a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood. Life has been good, but lately I found myself feeling restless. I never thought I would find myself attracted to someone else, especially not someone so close to our family. Sarah's mother, Linda, is 54 but looks much younger. She's got this timeless beauty about her, with her slender figure, long, dark hair, and those piercing blue eyes that seem to look right through you. She's always been nice to me, treating me like her own son. Over time, we developed a good relationship, friendly and comfortable. But things started to change when we both volunteered for the same charity. The charity work brought us closer. We worked at the local shelter, helping with food drives, organizing events, and spending long hours together. It was during these times that I started noticing her in a different way. I remember one evening after a long day at the shelter, we were both exhausted, sitting in the car, and she touched my hand lightly. It was just a brief moment, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Her touch lingered, soft and warm, and I felt something stir inside me. It was strange and confusing. I loved Sarah, but there was this undeniable attraction to Linda. At first, I thought it was just a fleeting feeling, something that would pass. But the more time we spent together, the stronger it grew. There was something about the way she looked at me, the way she laughed at my jokes, and the way she seemed to understand me on a deeper level. One night, Sarah had to work late, and Linda and I decided to continue working at the shelter. It was just the two of us. The atmosphere was charged with an electric tension I couldn't quite explain. We were sorting through donations, and every time our hands touched, it felt like a jolt of electricity. "Mark, you're really good at this," she said, her voice soft and warm. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Her words made me feel special, appreciated in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked at her, and our eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, a hunger that mirrored my own. My heart raced, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "Thanks, Linda," I replied, my voice a bit shaky. "I enjoy doing this, especially with you." She smiled, and for a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. I felt an overwhelming urge to touch her, to feel her skin against mine. But I held back, not wanting to cross a line I knew we couldn't come back from. The days that followed were filled with more moments like this. Innocent touches that lingered a bit too long, glances that spoke volumes, and conversations that left me longing for more. I found myself thinking about her constantly, craving the times we spent together. It was maddening and thrilling all at once. One evening, we were at a fundraising event. Sarah was busy talking to some donors, and Linda and I found ourselves alone in a quiet corner. She was wearing a black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She noticed my gaze and gave me a knowing smile. "You look beautiful tonight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Mark," she replied, stepping closer. "You don't look so bad yourself." Her proximity made my heart pound. I could smell her perfume, a heady mix of flowers and something sweet. It was intoxicating. She reached out and lightly touched my arm, her fingers trailing down to my hand. I felt a shiver run through me. "Linda," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are we doing?" She looked into my eyes, her expression serious. "I don't know, Mark, but I can't help how I feel." Her words mirrored my own feelings. I wanted her, needed her in a way that was almost painful, but I knew it was wrong. We were both married, and this could destroy everything. Yet in that moment, I didn't care. All I wanted was to kiss her, to feel her lips against mine. Just as I was about to lean in, Sarah appeared, her face lighting up when she saw us. "There you are. I was looking for you two." We quickly stepped apart, the moment shattered. Linda gave me a small, apologetic smile before turning to Sarah. "Just having a little chat. How's it going with the donors?" Sarah started talking about the event, completely unaware of the charged atmosphere between Linda and me. I tried to focus on what she was saying, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment with Linda. The touch of her hand, the look in her eyes. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I kept stealing glances at Linda, and every time our eyes met, I felt that same electric connection. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. By the end of the night, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I couldn't stop thinking about Linda, about what almost happened, and what it meant for my marriage. As I lay in bed that night, with Sarah sleeping soundly beside me, I knew I was at a crossroads. I had to make a choice, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face the consequences. The attraction I felt for Linda was undeniable, and it was only getting stronger. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. My life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The days after the fundraiser were filled with a mix of excitement and guilt. I couldn't stop thinking about Linda. Every touch, every glance, every word we shared replayed in my mind. I knew I was playing with fire, but the temptation was too strong to resist. I found myself looking for excuses to see her, to feel that rush of excitement whenever we were alone. Our charity work provided the perfect cover. We were spending more time together, planning events and coordinating activities. It was easy to justify our meetings to Sarah. She trusted us, never suspecting that anything more was going on. Linda and I became experts at finding private moments. A touch here, a whisper there, each encounter leaving me wanting more. One afternoon, we were working late at the shelter, organizing supplies for an upcoming event. The building was quiet, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Linda was wearing a simple blouse and jeans, but she looked stunning. Her hair was loose, cascading down her shoulders, and her scent filled the air around us. "Mark, can you help me with these boxes?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting. "Sure," I replied, moving closer to her. Our hands brushed as we lifted a box together, and I felt that familiar jolt of electricity. As we worked side by side, our bodies occasionally touched, sending waves of desire through me. I could feel her warmth, her closeness, and it was driving me crazy. Finally, we finished stacking the boxes and took a break. We sat down on a bench, close enough that our thighs were touching. "Thank you for staying late," Linda said, her eyes locking onto mine. "I really appreciate it." "No problem," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I enjoy spending time with you." She smiled, and for a moment we just sat there, lost in each other's gaze. Then, without thinking, I reached out and gently touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, letting our fingers intertwine. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of desire wash over me. "Linda," I whispered, leaning in closer, "I can't stop thinking about you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and fear. "I feel the same way, Mark, but we can't." Her words trailed off as I leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, tentative kiss at first, but it quickly deepened. Her lips were warm and inviting, and I felt a surge of passion as our tongues met. She moaned softly, and I felt her hand on my back, pulling me closer. We kissed for what felt like an eternity, lost in the moment. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our hearts pounding. I looked into her eyes, seeing the same desire mirrored in them. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't help myself." "I know," I replied, my voice filled with emotion. "I feel the same way." We sat there for a few moments, holding each other, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. We knew we were crossing a line, but the pull of our attraction was too strong to resist. Finally, we stood up, the reality of our actions sinking in. "We need to be careful," Linda said, her voice serious. "We can't let anyone find out." "I know," I replied, nodding. "We'll be careful." We left the shelter that night, our emotions in turmoil. I couldn't believe what had happened, but I couldn't deny the thrill of it either. As I drove home, my mind raced with thoughts of Linda, of our kiss, of what might happen next. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I couldn't stop myself. The desire was too strong, the temptation too great. The following days were a blur of stolen moments and secret touches. Every chance we got, we found a way to be alone together. Each encounter left me craving more, and I could tell Linda felt the same way. We were like magnets, drawn to each other by an irresistible force. One evening we were alone in the office, going over some paperwork. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Linda was sitting across from me, her eyes locked onto mine. I could see the desire in them, and it was driving me wild. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I can't keep doing this. It's too dangerous." "I know," I replied, my voice filled with emotion, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Before she could respond, I stood up and walked around the desk, pulling her into my arms. Our lips met in a fierce, passionate kiss, and I felt her body melt against mine. Her hands roamed over my back, pulling me closer, and I felt a surge of desire wash over me. We kissed for what felt like an eternity, lost in the heat of the moment. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our hearts pounding. I looked into her eyes, seeing the same desire mirrored in them. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't help myself." "I know," I replied, my voice filled with emotion. "I feel the same way." We held each other for a few moments, the reality of our situation pressing down on us. We knew we were playing with fire, but the pull of our attraction was too strong to resist. Finally, we pulled apart, the weight of our actions sinking in. "We need to be more careful," Linda said, her voice serious. "We can't let anyone find out." "I know," I replied, nodding. "We'll be careful." As I drove home that night, my mind raced with thoughts of Linda, of our kiss, of what might happen next. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I couldn't stop myself. The desire was too strong, the temptation too great, and deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of passion and secrecy. Linda and I couldn't get enough of each other. Every moment alone was charged with an electricity that neither of us could resist. We became experts at finding places to meet where we wouldn't be discovered. One evening, we decided to meet at a small, out-of-the-way motel on the edge of town. The thrill of sneaking away added to the excitement. As soon as I stepped into the room, I saw Linda waiting for me. She wore a red dress that clung to her curves, and her eyes sparkled with desire. I couldn't take my eyes off her. "Mark," she said softly, stepping towards me, "I've been waiting for you." I closed the distance between us and pulled her into my arms. Our lips met in a fierce, passionate kiss. Her body pressed against mine, and I felt a surge of desire. I needed her, wanted her in a way that was almost overwhelming. We stumbled towards the bed, shedding our clothes along the way. By the time we reached it, we were both naked, our bodies tangled together in a heated embrace. I kissed her neck, her shoulders, trailing my lips down her body. She moaned softly, her hands gripping my back, pulling me closer. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling with desire. "I want you." I couldn't wait any longer. I positioned myself over her, looking into her eyes as I entered her. The sensation was intense, almost overwhelming. She gasped, her nails digging into my back as I began to move. The room was filled with the sounds of our passion, our bodies moving together in a rhythm that felt natural and right. Every touch, every kiss, every movement was filled with a desperate need. We were both lost in the moment, consumed by our desire for each other. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. The pleasure built to an almost unbearable peak, and then we both cried out as we reached our climax together. Afterwards, we lay in each other's arms, our bodies still tingling from the intensity of our lovemaking. I looked into her eyes, seeing the same mix of satisfaction and guilt that I felt. "Linda," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "what are we doing?" She sighed, her fingers tracing patterns on my chest. "I don't know, Mark, but I can't help myself. I've never felt this way before. Me neither, I admitted. But we have to be careful. If anyone finds out. I know, she said, her voice filled with worry. But I can't stay away from you. I feel the same way, I replied, pulling her closer. We'll figure this out. Together. We spent the rest of the night in each other's arms, savoring the closeness, the intimacy. But as much as I wanted to stay in that moment forever, I knew we couldn't. Eventually, we would have to face the consequences of our actions. The next day, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to Linda. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about our night together. I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. What if someone found out? What if Sarah suspected something? I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but the pull of my attraction to Linda was too strong to resist. We continued to meet in secret, our encounters becoming more daring, more intense. Each time we were together, it felt like we were playing with fire, but neither of us could stop. One afternoon, we were alone in the office again, going over some paperwork. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Linda was sitting across from me, her eyes locked onto mine. I could see the desire in them, and it was driving me wild. Mark, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't keep doing this. It's too dangerous. I know, I replied, my voice filled with emotion, but I can't stop thinking about you. Before she could respond, I stood up and walked around the desk, pulling her into my arms. Our lips met in a fierce, passionate kiss, and I felt her body melt against mine. Her hands roamed over my back, pulling me closer, and I felt a surge of desire wash over me. We kissed for what felt like an eternity, lost in the heat of the moment. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our hearts pounding. I looked into her eyes, seeing the same desire mirrored in them. We can't keep doing this, she whispered, her voice trembling. But I can't help myself. I know, I replied, my voice filled with emotion. I feel the same way. We held each other for a few moments, the reality of our situation pressing down on us. We knew we were playing with fire, but the pull of our attraction was too strong to resist. Finally, we pulled apart, the weight of our actions sinking in. We need to be more careful, Linda said, her voice serious. We can't let anyone find out. I know, I replied, nodding. We'll be careful. As I drove home that night, my mind raced with thoughts of Linda, of our kiss, of what might happen next. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I couldn't stop myself. The desire was too strong, the temptation too great. And deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. The tension between Linda and me reached a boiling point. We were living on the edge, each stolen moment more dangerous than the last. The thrill was intoxicating, but the guilt was becoming unbearable. I knew we couldn't continue like this. We had to make a decision. One afternoon, Linda and I met at the shelter to discuss an upcoming event. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could see the worry in her eyes. We sat down, our usual playful banter replaced by a heavy silence. Mark, she began, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I know, I replied, my heart sinking. This can't go on. We're going to get caught. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I've been thinking about it a lot. I can't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone will find out. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I feel the same way. But it's so hard to let go. I don't want to lose you. We don't have a choice, she said, her voice breaking. We have to end this, for the sake of our families. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew she was right, but the thought of losing her was almost too much to bear. We sat there in silence, holding each other's hands, both of us struggling with our emotions. Finally, I spoke. Maybe we can find a way to stay in each other's lives. As friends. Linda looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness. I don't know if that's possible, Mark. The feelings we have, they're too strong. I know, I replied, my voice filled with despair. but I can't imagine my life without you in it. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. We'll have to try. But we need to be careful, keep our distance. For now, at least. We sat there for a while longer, neither of us wanting to let go, but we knew we had to. Slowly we stood up, our hands still intertwined. I looked into her eyes, trying to memorize every detail of her face. I love you, Linda, I whispered, my voice cracking. I love you too, Mark, she replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. But we have to do this. For Sarah, for my husband, for everyone. With a heavy heart, I let go of her hand and turned to leave. As I walked away, I felt a profound sense of loss. It was like a part of me was being ripped away, and I didn't know if I would ever feel whole again. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. I tried to focus on my work, on my marriage, but my mind kept drifting back to Linda. I missed her terribly, and the pain of our separation was almost unbearable. I knew I had to find a way to move on, but I didn't know where to start. Sarah noticed the change in me. She asked if everything was okay, if something was bothering me. I wanted to tell her the truth, to confess everything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I lied, telling her I was just stressed about work. She seemed to accept my explanation, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Linda and I tried to keep our distance, but it was difficult. We still had to work together on the charity events, and every time we saw each other, the tension was palpable. We managed to keep things professional, but it was a constant struggle. The desire, the longing, it was always there, just beneath the surface. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, I found myself driving to Linda's house. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to see her, to talk to her, to feel her presence. When I arrived, I saw her sitting on the porch, looking lost in thought. "Mark," she said softly as I approached, "what are you doing here?" "I couldn't stay away," I replied, my voice filled with emotion. "I needed to see you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and sadness. "We can't keep doing this. It's not fair to anyone." "I know," I said, taking her hand, "but I don't know how to let go." We stood there in silence, holding each other's hands, both of us struggling with our emotions. Finally, Linda spoke. "We have to be strong," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to do this for our families." "I know," I replied, my heart breaking. "But it's so hard." With a heavy heart, I turned to leave, feeling the weight of our decision pressing down on me. As I walked away, I felt a profound sense of loss, knowing that things would never be the same again. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I would always carry a piece of Linda with me, no matter what. The next few weeks were a blur of pain and longing. Linda and I kept our distance, trying to focus on our families and our responsibilities. It was difficult, but we managed to get through it, one day at a time. I knew it would take time to heal, but I held on to the hope that someday we might find a way to be in each other's lives again, even if it was just as friends. The weeks after our painful decision to end the affair were the hardest I've ever faced. Every day felt like a struggle to keep going, to focus on my work and my marriage. Linda and I did our best to keep our distance, but the longing never went away. Each time I saw her at charity events, my heart ached with a mix of desire and sorrow. Sarah noticed the change in me. She asked if something was wrong, if I was unhappy. I lied, telling her it was just work stress, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I hated myself for hurting her, for the secrets I kept. I knew I had to make things right. I decided to focus on my marriage, to try and rebuild the trust and connection with Sarah. We started spending more time together, going on dates and talking more openly. It wasn't easy. My mind often drifted back to Linda, but I forced myself to concentrate on Sarah. I owed her that much. One evening, Sarah and I were sitting on the couch, watching a movie. She leaned against me, her warmth and presence comforting. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. "Mark," she said softly, "I've missed this. Us, being close." "I know," I replied, kissing her forehead. I've missed it too. I'm sorry for being so distant lately. I want to make things better between us. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with hope. I want that too. Let's work on it together. That night, as we lay in bed, I held Sarah close, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew I had to let go of the past, of Linda, if I wanted to save my marriage. It was a slow process, but each day I felt a little stronger, a little more committed to making things right. Linda and I still saw each other at charity events, but we kept our interactions professional. It was difficult, but we both knew it was necessary. The pain of our separation was still there, but it was becoming more manageable with time. One afternoon, I was at the shelter, sorting through donations. Linda was there too, working in another room. I felt her presence, but I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. Suddenly, she appeared in the doorway, looking hesitant. "Mark," she said softly, "can we talk for a moment?" I nodded, my heart pounding. We stepped outside, away from prying eyes and ears. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, "for everything. I know this hasn't been easy for either of us, but I think we're doing the right thing." "I know," I replied, my voice filled with emotion. "It's been hard, but we're getting through it. How are you holding up?" She sighed, looking away. "It's been tough. I miss you, Mark. But I'm trying to focus on my family, just like you." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. Finally, I reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I miss you too, Linda, but we have to keep moving forward. For our families." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me. Even if we can't be together, you'll always have a special place in my heart." I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced myself to smile. "You too, Linda. You'll always be special to me." We stood there for a moment longer, then slowly let go of each other's hands. It felt like the final goodbye, a bittersweet ending to a chapter of our lives. As I watched her walk away, I knew it was time to let go, to focus on the future. Back at home, I threw myself into my marriage with renewed determination. Sarah and I started couples therapy, working through our issues and rebuilding our connection. It wasn't easy, but we were making progress. Each day, I felt a little more hopeful, a little more certain that we could make it through. One night, after a particularly good therapy session, Sarah and I sat on the porch, looking up at the stars. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling a sense of contentment. "Mark," she said softly, "I'm really glad we're doing this. I feel like we're getting closer again." "Me too," I replied, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Sarah. I'm committed to making this work." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you too, Mark. We can get through anything, as long as we're together." As I held her close, I felt a sense of peace and resolution. The past few months had been a roller coaster of emotions, but I knew we were on the right path. I still thought about Linda sometimes, but the pain was fading. I was learning to let go, to focus on the present and the future. Sarah and I continued to work on our marriage, growing stronger each day. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were building something together, something that could withstand the storms of life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Linda and I still crossed paths occasionally, but our interactions were brief and cordial. There was no more tension, no more longing. Just a quiet understanding of what had been and what could never be. We had both moved on, focusing on our families and our futures. As I lay in bed that night, with Sarah sleeping soundly beside me, I felt a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength to move on, and for the chance to rebuild my marriage. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And with that thought, I closed my eyes, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. The past was behind me, and the future was full of possibilities. As long as I had Sarah by my side, I knew we could get through anything together.